The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
And welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly, episode 23. We've been talking to Chris Golden, member of the board of directors of the CMMC Accreditation Board. And I refuse to say what CMMC stands for because it's so long and complicated. Couple of announcements and we'll get back into the discussion. We are looking at Security Weekly for some help from our listening audience. We are looking for high quality guest suggestions for our Enterprise Security Weekly podcast. We're trying to fill up our upcoming recording schedule. We're committed to providing educational and entertaining content for the InfoSec community, and we would love to hear from you about who you would like us to interview on that show. Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and fill out the form. We review the suggestions that we get from that form monthly, and we'll reach out to you once we've reviewed it. Also, join Qualys for VMDR Live on April 21st at 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time for a live demonstration of the game-changing, and if you were wondering what VMDR stood for, Vulnerability Management Detection and Response offering. This is a unified solution that integrates vulnerability management, threat prioritization, and patching into a single app. You can register at securityweekly.com/VMDR 2020. All right, let's get back to it. We've been talking to Chris Golden about CMMC, and in the second segment, we want to try to focus on, since it's kind of new, what the game plan is. How is this thing going to play out? How is it going to work? Does anybody have any questions initially to kick us off on the second segment?
Of course, I always have a question.
Yeah, we have questions.
I thought it was
a
good
softball
to go through the different levels and get an understanding from Chris on kind of the plan for the different levels. As we heard in the break, it sounds like you're going to go up to level 3. So, Johnny, why don't you throw the slide up? And Chris, let's talk through the different CMMC levels and kind of talk through what the current plan is from the accreditation board for each of those levels.
Okay, yeah, sure. So the biggest thing to know about the model probably is that there are two sides of it. There is a technical control side, process side, and then a process side, sorry. So you have to be at the right level on both of those issues to actually receive a certification score. So at level 1, 17 controls and no process. Right. So if you've got those 17 controls in place, you're probably looking good. You're ready to go and move on. There is no process stuff there. We don't expect to see documentation. We don't expect to see process improvement. We don't expect to see any of that kind of stuff that you would see on the process side. Level 2 is really the introduction of the process stuff. And frankly, you can ask DoD about this, but my guess is you really won't see contracts come out with level 2 requirements. It's either going to be 1 or 3 most likely. So level 2 is all the same 17 controls, but now we've introduced some of the process steps we want to see. We want to see policy. We want to see process improvement. We want to see those things that tell us you are putting this kind of cybersecurity stuff into your DNA. It's part of your normal business processes, and you're moving forward with it. It's not a one and done kind of thing, and you forget about it until the next time you get assessed. So that's what level 2 is. Level 3 is fundamentally NIST 171, with the addition of about 20 extra controls that the people that built the model thought were important, so they added them. But if you're 171 compliant now, you're very, very close to being level 3. And now we're starting to really look at hard on the process side. We really want to see policies. We want to see people have accountability. We want to see some metrics that you're measuring the stuff that's going on. And so that's the sort of crawl, walk, run process we see moving from 1 to 3 up the board. When you get to level 4s and 5s, you're really talking about major kind of acquisition things. Companies that have security operations centers, for instance, are going to be requirements under level 5. Most likely that's a $2 to $3 million a year buy to get a 24/7 SOC on-prem. So not a lot of small companies are going to do that, and we don't expect many to do that. I think right now the expectation is less than 1% of the members in the DIB will be level probably 4 and 5. It's just going to be those specific ones. And what you don't see there are any of the classified systems. So any classified system, secret, CIPRNet, top secret, JWIC, Socrates, and above are out of scope for the CMMC program. We are just looking at the unclassified stuff. The DoD has assessment organizations to go out and do assessments of classified systems, so that's their job, not ours.
Got it. So that's why I was curious why I didn't see anything higher than controlled unclassified information, is because the DoD is going to keep the scope for those services in those contracts.
Correct.
Okay, good.
So looking at this slide, and for those that are just listening, I encourage you to jump over and look at the video that's available on YouTube. You mentioned, and just to make sure everybody caught it, because it got a little bit choppy, I think there's sort of two phases or aspects to the program. One is the processes side, which is sort of the dark blue boxes that you see on this slide, and then the other side is practice, which very much is reminiscent of PCI in terms of, from a documentation perspective, what are your processes? What do you claim to be doing on paper? And then the practice side is, are you actually doing it? Which is why I love PCI, and I encourage the CMMC program to concentrate on that aspect of it. I guess my question, based on the levels, just out of the gate, organizations that want to participate in the procurement process, is there a minimum level that they need to achieve in order to be able to participate?
So the answer to that is sort of yes and no. So everybody has to have a CMMC score to bid on contracts eventually. Right now, because we're sort of coming out the gate, it will be determined at time of award initially, whether you have a score or not at the time of award, whether you can get the contract or not. But over time, as everybody gets certified, it will become a gate to bidding on contracts, I'm sure. In terms of the level of score, it really depends on the contract. What we're hearing from the DoD, and certainly this can change, is that they're going to put in language in the contracts that say what work needs to be done at a specific level. So for instance, they may say this part of the statement of work must be done at the 3 level, this part must be done at the 1 level, this one little tiny enclave needs to be done at the 4 level, for example. And then the prime will have to figure out which one of their subs can actually meet those criteria. There will not be a one size fits all. So if the contract is a level 3, the prime and all the subs will need to be level 3. It's not going to work that way. There will be specific requirements for specific pieces of work. Most of them will be level 1. That's just the way it's going to work, with the vast majority of the companies in the defense industrial base being small and micro at the level 1. It makes sense that most of these little tiny contracts will be level 1 contracts. But there will be enclaves for very specific pieces of work, but the DoD will put that in the requirements in the contract so everybody knows who's doing what and at what level.
Got it. So basically, what I just heard was that
let me step in
you
here
have to
and
be
ask.
a minimum of a level 1 to participate in the procurement process.
Correct. But if you're bidding on a level 3, you will self-eliminate if you're a level 1, obviously.
Yep.
So the C3PAO that we talked about earlier, right? How important are they for these levels? Like, where is the C3PAO going to come into play? Is it all levels? Is it 1 level? Can you go into that?
Absolutely. So yeah, the C3PAOs are the companies that will conduct the assessments. They will hire certified assessors to actually do the audits. Those assessors will be trained based on which level they are assessing, 1 through 5. So for instance, if you are a level 1 assessor, you cannot do a level 3 assessment. If you're a level 3 assessment, you cannot do a level 4 assessment, et cetera, et cetera. So depending on the nature of work that the C3PAO is planning on doing, they will hire whatever mix of people they need to do meet the contractual obligations they have set with the defense industrial base companies they're working with. But the training for that will come through us. We're developing the training as we speak. And so you'll be certified at a specific level, and you can go out and do that work. And and then over time, let's say, you need some more experience before you can move from level 1 to level 2 or level 3. Over time, you'll get that, and we'll increase your certification. There'll be probably another test you'll take. Pass the test, have the experience, we'll slap a 3 on you. Now you can go do level 3s, et cetera, et cetera. But since the vast majority will be level 1 assessments, the vast majority of assessors will be level 1 assessors.
Okay, so it doesn't matter. So what you're saying is it doesn't matter if you're 1 or 5, you're getting a C3 PAO to look at your stuff, period, end of story, correct?
Correct. Everybody gets looked at.
Okay.
And if you're a level 3, you can do level 2 and level 1 assessments, I assume, which means, for at least the near term, kind of level 3 is kind of that sweet spot, because you can do level 3s and all the ways down, and also probably provide some good guidance for those level 2s, because the way you have the level 2s identified here on the summary slide is kind of that transition between a level 1 and a level 3, right? And so my guess is because the processes kick in at level 2 to get to a level 3, the guidance will be required by some of these companies on what it's going to take to implement those processes, policies, et cetera, to eventually get to a level 3. And I would imagine most of that guidance would come from a level 3 C3 PAO.
Yeah, I think that's certainly one way it could work. The market will drive a lot of this stuff over time. Initially, we'll know which contracts are going to be the Pathfinder contracts with the DoD. We'll know sort of ahead of the time what levels they're looking for, so we can bring out enough assessors to do those levels. If it's, and I'll make up some number, if it's 5 level 1s and 2 level 3s, we'll make sure we have trained enough people to do that coming out the gate. The one thing you said there that just sort of caught my mind is what we call OCIs, organizational conflicts of interest. So if you are a C3 PAO and or an assessor, that's your job. You don't get to go back and offer consulting services to the company that you just assessed to get them better or to help them get more healthy. That's got to be somebody else's job. We want a big black line there between the people that are consulting and helping these companies reach their maturity level and the people that are assessing that maturity level.
Now,
right,
Josh, I agree with you that the CMMC has bypassed and leapfrog PCI, because PCI does not enforce that requirement.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, Matt. As I'm hearing you describe this program, I have a couple thoughts, and the one thing that I'm sticking on that I'm interested in getting your point of view, Chris, is, so the way PCI works is PCI, the Security Council, was set up as a quote unquote independent body that represents the interests of the card brands, who ultimately it's their credit cards and debit cards that are at risk in the whole fraud and financial loss and so forth. But the council is set up as an independent body that creates the standards, is not necessarily responsible for enforcement or interpretation of the rules. They just provide the rules. Bear with me. And in the PCI ecosystem, who really has the most power at the end of the day to sort of interpret is the QSA or the QSA company. So to try to sort of fold that back into the model that you're building out here, the C3 PAO can or should or will be sort of the interpreters of the rules. But what I'm curious about is, whereas PCI Council is set up as an independent body to represent the interests ultimately of the card brands, and the card brands being, the major ones, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express, whom most people feel have a pretty good idea of what they're doing in terms of cybersecurity, trying to prevent fraud, compromise, it's their bread and butter. What I'm intrigued about and what I'm curious about here is the CMMC ultimately represents the government, and I'm not convinced that the government is the real stakeholders, the analogy being that the card brands are the stakeholders within the PCI world, are at least regarded as having the equivalent level of security maturity as the card brands do. Not saying they do, just saying that they have that sort of reputation. So I guess what I'm wondering about, and what I'm curious as to what your thoughts are, is the way that the CMMC has been set up and the way you're projecting to execute this. Are the stakeholders really the government, whatever government entity wants to play in the process? Are the interpreters of the rules really going to be the C3PAOs, and the CMMC? Are they really going to be the arbiters in terms of setting up the requirements, but not necessarily interpreting it, or in particular enforcing the levels and the adherence to the levels of of the program? Thoughts?
So unfortunately, I didn't write those down in order, so I'm gonna have to come back to you and ask which one was 2 and 3. So yes,
we might have
I
to go to
believe
the tape. I have no idea what I just said. I know it was a lot.
Our primary stakeholder obviously is the Department of Defense. That's who we have a partnership with. That's who we've signed the memorandum of understanding with. But at the end of the day, you're talking about, if you're right, a $600 billion transfer of intellectual property between us and our adversaries. The ultimate stakeholder is the taxpayer, right? That's the person that's paying for all that research and development, and then having that money flow away and effort flow away because it's not controlled. So in my mind, it's the taxpayer. We talked about in the first episode that maybe CMMC becomes a model outside the DoD procurement industry, and I would say it's the same thing there. You're protecting data in a lot of different ways, but here's a standard that may or may not be better than some of the others ones. So that's I think the first answer to your question. I'm trying to remember the second one was. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't remember the second part of your question.
Well, basically, what I'm asking is, the PCI ecosystem. There's sort of defined roles, and there's sort of this implicit deflection that the PCI Council very often does. They are very quick to say, we write the rules, we're not responsible for enforcing or interpreting the rules. They just simply write the rules. Now, obviously, if you're thinking about it, if they're writing the rules, they've got some sort of idea, at the very least, of how the rules should be interpreted or enforced. But because of their sensitivities to putting a stake in the sand and interpreting and having it blow up in their face, basically. I guess I'm wondering,
you're going to see us have that fear.
Okay. Well, that's what I'm trying to get at. Okay.
Yeah, so the model's owned by the Department of Defense. They've contracted with a number of people, Software Engineering Institute, Applied Physics Lab, et cetera, to help create the model and maintain the model going forward. So as technology changes and threat vectors changes, the model will grow, right? It's a living model for us. We're going to work really, really hard to make sure that the C3POs and the assessors have all the tools they use to do this consistently across the board, right? If you're being assessed today and then 3 years later you get your next assessment and it's a different person, different C3PO, it should be pretty similar. It should look and feel about the same as to what it was the first time. So we want to cage them in terms of how they evaluate things, what they think is good and what they think is bad, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll be taking probably a much bigger role than the PCI Institute on this kind of stuff, to make sure that it is consistent across the board, that when one company has or does not have a specific control or has implemented it in a specific way, that they get graded the same way going forward by all the assessors. And so that's something we as the board have taken on to make sure we do that.
So I have a real basic. Sorry, Matt. Real quick, I have a real basic question. You've referred to the process of getting a grade or getting a score. What does that look like? I mean, is the score simply you're a level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or is it you're 80% of the way of becoming a level 2, or 30% towards becoming a level 3? How do you envision the scoring actually playing out?
So the way we envision it is simply a pass-fail. Current 171, kind of standards. You can say, hey, I've got this security plan. This is what I'm trying to build to. Here are my POAMs of things that I don't have, but my plan to get to them. Those are still very valuable to the companies, but they are not valuable to the CMMC program. It is a pass-fail. So you will either receive the certification of 1 through 5 that you're looking for, or if you meet the criteria, and you can receive something less. So, for instance, you're shooting for a 3, but you're missing a number of things. If you meet the criteria for 2, we'll give you a 2. If you don't meet the criteria for a 2, but you meet the criteria for a 1, we'll give you a 1. If you don't meet any of that criteria, you won't get a score. So that's the way it's going to work. It's going to be pass-fail. We have to take that snapshot in time of where you are right now, not where you plan to be in the future. We're not going to allow you the wiggle room to say, well, I don't have a DLP solution, but I'm planning on buying one in the next quarter. That's not going to fly. You have to have the DLP solution implemented and ready to go by the time we get there.
Okay. Matt?
Yeah, and then for like when you introduce the process, right, you just said snap in time, right? But we know that there's ongoing policies and processes for level 2, level 3, 4, and 5. What's the requirements then from the ongoing validation? This is one of the areas that I think gets really tricky in some of the other third-party vendor management solutions we've seen out there, right? Is this the ongoing nature is, yeah, this is a point in time. I would imagine this is an annual recert, but are there any other requirements for the different levels to provide some level of insight on a more frequent basis, or is this just going to be an annual assessment cert process and that's it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Long answer is I don't know. Short answer is I think the DoD is leaning towards once every 3 years on the assessment. So you'll get a visit from a CMMC assessor once every 3 years. Do we need some kind of functionality to take a look at you in the interim? Probably. Do I know what that is? No, I do not. But we'll get there, in time when we start to flush all this kind of stuff out. But I agree with you. There probably needs to be some kind of continuous monitoring solution or something like that to let everybody know where you are in between the 3-year snapshots.
Yeah, well, it's always been a challenge in the third-party space is that just that constant refresh to know, did the risk change? Did the environment change? Am I still compliant or not compliant with the requirements? So,
yeah.
Well, and what you're really asking, Matt, I think is and this is something we talked a little bit on our prep call, Chris, is what is the vision for actually enforcing? So, C3 POs go through and give your organization, let's say, a level 2. And enforcement, I think, pans out a little bit differently. Is there a dispute process? The company says, "Whoa, we think we're a level 3 solidly." How do we push back? But also, as Matt was alluding to, over time, let's say a company got rated as a level 3, they get into the middle of the contract, some sort of breach happens, and it becomes apparent that, well, they said that they were a level 3, they were scored as a level 3, but clearly they were missing the mark, and they were really more like a level 1.5. What's the enforcement going to look like? Disputes number 1 and enforcement number 2. Thoughts?
Well, yeah, makes it easier to answer. So disputes, yes, there's a dispute resolution process. So if you were trying to be a level 1 or a level 3 and you did not make that bar and you got something less than what you needed, you can come to the AB and we've got a process to do that. I'm not going to tell you all the nuts and bolts of it, but I'm just going to say that we are incentivizing the process for you to do it right the first time, right? So if you do it right the first time, the costs are much lower. It's much easier to do. If you're not, then the price goes up basically for the dispute kind of stuff. We want to make it harder for people to do the wrong behavior. There's always going to be disputes in professional organizations like this. The way I look at a control is going to be different than the next guy or gal, and so that's why we're trying to have the training in such a way that the assessors are caged as to what they're looking at the same way every time going forward. And then enforcement. It's the DoD not allowing you to bid or get awarded a contract. That is the enforcement mechanism.
Yeah, right now it's that you can bid on a contract without being certified yet. But once, obviously, it's a contract that has CMMC in it. But once you're told, hey, you've won, to be awarded the contract, you have to be certified. So if you're not certified, you simply don't get the contract. They go to the next company that is.
Yeah, but I think, but Jeff brings up a very interesting scenario. Let's say I'm awarded a contract as a level 3, and partway through the contract, my organization is breached, and therefore you could look at it and say, are you really a 3? What happens then, right? Does the DoD have the ability to cancel the contract, move the contract? Is that an enforcement mechanism for a mid-contract issue?
Well, first off, I mean, obviously, if we did follow PCI, we would claim that you'd never been compliant at all, and that would be the way we should do that. But
So the question really goes to the DoD. You'll have to ask the DoD what their plans are. You know, if someone were to suffer a breach in the middle of their execution of their contract, I think we at the accreditation body, the DoD partners we work with, most of the industry partners we work with, all understand there's no such thing as perfect security, right? You could be a level 5, and we could assess you, and the next day you can get owned. It just that's the nature of the beast. And so the fact that you suffer a breach is indicative in and of itself of really not too much about the CMMC. Clicking on a phishing link, circumvents the vast majority of defenses out there, right? So user behavior has a lot to do with it, but I don't think there's a set criteria that says if you are level whatever and you suffer this kind of breach or this kind of invert disclosure or this kind of whatever, that there's automatic actions going to be taken, because there is no such thing as perfect security in any environment.
I think that my guess is, just to be clear, my guess is that what would happen was, let's assume, Matt, your scenario, where they've certified as a level 3, they've gone 6 months, whatever, and they're in the middle of a contract or middle of an option year or whatever it is, and then they have a breach. First off, in the controls that are under the CMMC or that are tied to CMMC, there are disaster recovery, there are disaster response, there are incident response, et cetera, parts of it. So they recognize that that things happen, as Chris, as you said. But also, I think what would happen, my guess, is that they would say, what changed? Did anything change between when you were certified and now? Did anything change that you dumbed down or made security worse? And if the answer is no, we changed out some systems, we have equivalent controls, nothing has really gone badly, then they'll probably be, that's fine, it happens. Let's deal with it and let's move on.
Yeah, if I had to guess, and this is strictly a guess, I would say probably somebody from the DoD, probably somebody from the AB, and probably the assessor that did the assessment might travel back and take a look at what's going on there.
Right.
Not necessarily to place blame, but to find out, is there something systemically wrong with the program? Did we overlook something that we need to add to the model or update the way we do it, or that kind of stuff? What is wrong with the system that allowed this to happen? And obviously, user error happens, right? So that's something you're dealing with people. You're going to have mistakes happen, but is there something we missed? Something systemically important here that we go? That's I think the first question that has to get asked, and then the second question would be like, okay, then what did you do locally to enable this kind of thing to happen? But I think from our perspective at the higher level, we're more concerned with the systemic, system-wide failures that maybe we missed something.
Yeah, but Matt, that's a really interesting point. Disclaimer, I'm not allowed to tell which one, but I have been accepted to one of the working groups. I was very clearly told, don't tell anybody which one. But anyway, for the CMMC AB, and I think I'm going to bring that point that you raise about what happens in a mid-cycle breach or whatever into that working group. That was a good one, Matt. Thank you.
Well, it aligns to Jeff's question around enforcement, right? There has to be some sort of review or enforcement mechanism after the fact that you're certified, and after, if you're in the middle of a contract, just to protect. Look, if the goal of the CMMC is to protect our intellectual property falling into the hands of people, any contractor that has a breach during a contract should have some sort of review process, and that's what I want to make sure gets accounted for in some form or fashion, because that could be leaking data, which is the program's trying to prevent. Anyways.
Well, so you all are bringing up really interesting points, but we need to pay a little bit of attention to the flip side of that scenario, right? Let's say we go down the road of a COTAR, right, a contracting officer's technical representative, or the contracting officer puts out a bid, says you need to be CMMC 1, right? But after the bid is awarded, right, everything's been verified, the prime is now responsible for working with the DoD entity or the COTAR or the CO, right? The prime is advising the CO that the CMMC level is not correct. What can we do retroactively after the contract's been awarded to ensure that the correct level is not only in place, right, but to help fix that moving forward with defining which level goes where? And I have a follow-on question after this. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's a real easy answer. You got to ask the DoD that one. We're not going to be able to answer that one. DoD is going to have to come up with a process for that, and then they'll let us know.
My follow-on question is, there's going to be training for CMMC required for COs and COTARs. And with that training, do you or the board foresee COs and COTARs being known for saying, okay, all of my contracts are level 3, that's it, I'm not dealing with anything else, right? Or is there going to be a mandate that you cannot be just one level specific, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but that's a question we need to ask the DoD. I don't know how they're going to train their people, and I don't know how they're going to implement it on the contracts. We've been told, again, that there will be different levels per contract based on what the work is required in the Section C and I think Section L of the contracts. But any more of that, you need to go to DoD, unfortunately. Sorry.
Now, is DoD going to have an open forum for these questions?
Again, I don't know. I haven't heard anything about it.
No, that's fine. Okay.
So a couple sort of closing thoughts, and maybe a question still is in here. As a former DoD employee, ex-NSA, I cringe every time I hear you describing this program and describe it as looking to NIST as the model. Because when I was in the DoD, NIST was responsible for unclassified networks, which I think is probably the carryover here. But they also had the reputation of not really having their act together, so to speak. That, back in the day, the DoD, the NSA had, they were the experts on all this cybersecurity stuff. So that's just a comment. Sort of an extension of what I was asking earlier. It sounds like, or what I'm curious now about is indemnity, both for the CMMC and the C3PAOs. And what I'm asking is, to not use college words, SAT words, liability. Something happens, a breach happens in the middle of a project, in the middle of a contract, an entity is viewed as being not meeting the CMMC level that they were assessed as being. What's the indemnity, or what's the protection in terms of liability for both C3PAOs and also the CMMC itself?
Honestly, I don't know. Obviously there is no such thing as perfect security. So regardless of who does it, regardless of what level it comes out as, regardless of what extra things a company may throw in to their security program, there is no such thing as perfect security. So I don't know how the courts are going to start acting on that kind of stuff. I certainly expect there will be litigation in the future, but how all that's going to work out and flow and meet in terms of who's actually responsible, I don't have the first guess.
Well, we all have to keep in mind that anytime you do an audit, whether it's a CMMC audit, it's a PCI audit, right? It's a 171
There's no such
audit.
thing as a PCI audit. It's an assessment. But go ahead, Scott.
Okay, anytime you do a PCI audit, no, you're right, Jeff.
No, I'm not. I'm losing that battle.
It's just a snapshot of that point in time, right? Everything that the company has done up till that point in time. You can't cover the future, right? So, unfortunately, due diligence is always what's going to win the battle here, right? Am I right? Am I right? Am I wrong? What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. The more you can show, to a potential court that, you are following the rules as best as they were explained to you by the authoritative source, I think the less room there is for a defense attorney to come after you. But I'm not a lawyer, so I can't get legal advice, nor do I want to. But it's something we'll have to tackle in the future. I'm just not sure exactly how we're going to do that yet.
Okay.
Well, Chris, we need to wrap up, but I'll give you the floor for any parting thoughts. Positive pitches, messages concerning CMMC. Give us the 90-second why we should be involved in this.
Yeah, I think it's critically important for the country. Like I said, I think my biggest stakeholder is going to be the taxpayer. We're doing everything we can at the AB to keep this as cost effective and low impact as possible to all the companies involved in the defense industrial base. We sort of understand as small business owners ourselves, what you're going through, what you're going to need to go through, and we're being very cognizant of that. We're working very closely with DoD. I think we're in lockstep with sort of the plans and the scope of what we want to do. I know there's not a lot of great information out there. That's why these kind of things are important. Thank you again for having me. If you've got questions, please go to our website, cmmcab.org. A lot of good information there. And if you're still unsure, there's a number of emails you can reach out to and ask us direct questions, and we're pretty good about getting back to you. But thanks for having me today. I greatly appreciate it.
Chris, absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, Chris,
Yeah,
thanks
for taking time
so
and coming
much. Been a very interesting discussion with the tip of the hat to PCI. I think CMMC is putting its best foot forward and trying to tackle this as best as it can. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the next months and years. That'll wrap us for today. Security and Compliance Weekly, episode 23. Be safe, be secure, be isolated, and we'll see you next time.